I'm going to begin this speech by recounting a story I heard from Philosophy Grad online. One day, his professor gave him and his students 2 hours to justify all of their long-held beliefs, beliefs that they would die on a hill for. He then proceeded to logically dismantle each and every single one of them. It was grueling. Imagine having to hear, aha, that's bandwagon fallacy, when saying something as simple as I like democracy. Not fun. But you might be wondering whether there was some kind of method to this madness, some reason for this. What exactly was the professor trying to teach his students? I think we should put a pin in that question for now. I know that those small, trivial debates we have over the course of our day can often be extremely entertaining. I once spent 90 whole minutes debating about which card in Clash Royale requires less skill to use, Mega Knight or Boss Bandit. But I also know of many instances where you just know that the person you're talking to is wrong. You know it for a fact, for certain, but you can't quite put a finger on it. And that's exactly where logical fallacies come in. You see, over the past few centuries, we've come up with vast rules of informal logic. They've given us the ability to point out flaws in arguments and to see through the tactics of dirty debaters. And this is primarily done by calling out logical fallacies, which are just errors in a person's argument. Consider the statement, the sky is blue because I love my girlfriend and her hair is blue. This statement is obviously fallacious. Why? Because the color of the sky has barely anything to do with the color of someone's hair. Easy enough. But what I want you to do is pay attention to what I'm actually doing here. I'm investigating the logical soundness of some kind of proposition to arrive at some statement about the truth. And that process is called dialectic. Dialectic, in turn, forms a cornerstone of rhetoric, which is just the art of persuasion as a whole. And together, these two form the buttress for the entirety of human knowledge, which makes them quite important. In that sense, logical fallacies are the actual anti-nonsense framework that enables this entire setup to work in the first place. But before we go on, let's get one very important question out the way. Why even bother with all this debate and rhetoric stuff? I mean, they're just words. Surely these things wouldn't ever stand up to cold, hard facts. Yeah, I wish things were that simple, but in actuality, they aren't. Because ultimately, we are the ones that decide what facts are and what facts are not. And we humans are incredibly irrational and illogical beings. So, to resolve our deeply flawed mindsets, we chose to invent the holy grail that is debate, which, at its most fundamental, meant one thing and one thing only: the process of pursuing the truth. Easy enough, but the implications were very wide. Throughout all of human history, every single disagreement we've had was resolved either through this or through blood and steel. I think we can all agree on which one we'd prefer. But this foundational principle is under attack. Why? Because, as it turns out, logical fallacies, our way of correcting logic, have actually created a new fallacy out of thin air. It's called the fallacy. Let's see what the issue is here at hand. The problem started back when self-professed connoisseurs of logic began spotting holes in the arguments of all the things they once took for granted. These fallacy mongers then began to fall into an existential crisis. They made the classic mistake of assuming that a conclusion is false just because it was poorly argued for. Let's get back to our example about the color of the sky. Sure, that argument was fallacious, but we can't use the existence of that flaw to then counterclaim and say that the color of the sky is not blue. That would be even more absurd. We can only ever infer that the argument is wrong, but not necessarily the conclusion. And that might seem like a very small distinction and very easy to point out. But in practice, spotting the fallacy is extremely difficult. And strap in, because things are about to get a whole lot worse. What's interesting is that the fallacy would not have existed without the concept of a logical fallacy to begin with. What this implies is that our tools to correct logic create more problems that require further correction. And if we take it to the extreme, what this would mean is an endless loop of creation and correction, fallacy after fallacy, with no end in sight. This is perplexing. For now, let's call this the fallacy paradox. And yes, it gets even worse. Have you ever ended a relationship, thought you were doing everything right in the moment, only to look back and realize there were probably a few things you could have done at least a bit better? Or have you ever felt nostalgic for the good old days, only to look back and realize, I never actually realized they were the good old days until they were already gone, beyond my sight. Those aren't just random depressing or irritating phenomena. They're also going to be the arch nemesis of my speech, the Owl of Minerva. Let's explain. Minerva is a goddess of wisdom, and the quotation behind this concept goes, the Owl of Minerva spreads her wings only at dusk. That is, during the day, when we need her the most, when we need her wisdom and her truth the most, we can't really see it. Only at the end of the day, when everything is truly said and done, when we no longer need it, are the true errors, the true depths of our errors visible to us. And that can be a huge problem because our fallacy paradox is just an application of the Owl of Minerva. What it means is that we can only ever be right about something in hindsight. When we attempt to correct our logic by calling out logical fallacies, we create new fallacies that we do not yet know about. Only when they're made more widespread can we try and correct them. But by then, it's too late. When we do correct them, new fallacies will already have emerged. The flaws of logic are ever present and inherent. You try to whack one, another one pops up out of nowhere. That is the central tragedy of dialectic. And since we now know how immensely important dialectic is for resolving disputes, this realization can paint a sordid picture of the future. And now, on to the point of the speech. The million-dollar question. What exactly are we supposed to do now? Honestly, I have zero clue. This is extremely perplexing after all. But since we are grasping at straws anyway, why not try looking a bit more into the man that discovered this pesky Owl of Minerva thing that's been bugging us so much? That would be Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Now, to oversimplify, Hegel was an amazing man with brilliant insights, but the school of thought that he popularized, what we would call German idealism, was not without criticism. Let's see why. If you were to ask a normal person what a salad is, they would say it's a dish consisting of lettuce leaves. They would point to something like this. Fair enough. But if you were to ask a German idealist, they would instead point to something like this. Now, don't worry. We don't need to understand what this salad monster is for the purpose of this speech. Instead, what we should focus on is what led us to this point. You see, German idealism was a system of philosophy that was designed to be so perfect and impeccable that it could encompass the entirety of human knowledge in one general system. But here's a snag. We know from our fallacy paradox that this sort of system is just completely unobtainable. The result? Its philosophical insights into everyday objects grew more and more convoluted, while the ideal in the idealism drifted further apart. Hence the salad monster. Now, you wouldn't be wrong to look at this and get very confused or even extremely annoyed that something so simple would require so complex a definition. Arthur Schopenhauer was one example of someone who really did not like German Hegelianism. He often wrote long essays lamenting that so many men were getting wrapped up in what he called to be completely mindless buffoonery. But what exactly does this conflict that I've just talked about have anything to do with what I said before, the fallacy paradox? You know, I think we've hit another dead end. If this alone won't cut it, perhaps we can try and search for something more among the forefathers of philosophy itself. Plato. Plato was one of philosophy's all-time greats. He authored seminal works like The Republic and The Apology. He was also an idealist, and he laid its foundations for centuries to come. Possibly the most famous man in Athens. But Plato's philosophy, too, wasn't infallible. Let's look at a pretty funny example. One day, when trying to distinguish between what makes men different from other animals, he said quite confidently, "Man is but a featherless biped." Diogenes the Cynic, another philosopher, possibly the most infamous man in Athens, hears this and finds it ridiculous. So he hatches a plan. He strolls up to the nearest market, buys a fresh chicken, plucks all of its feathers, shows up right outside Plato's symposium, and screams, "Behold, a man!" Diogenes believed that Plato's philosophy would often risk dangerous or even nonsensical oversimplifications, and that this idealism would leave many things to be desired. Aristotle, another one of Plato's own students, distanced himself from idealism in favor of what he called practical pursuits in the spheres of politics or ethics. I think we can see a bit of a correlation here. Both of the cases I've looked at involve a discord between the ideal and the pragmatic. But how can we develop this further? How can we use this to answer our question? Maybe we could try taking a bit of a foray into the visual arts. When Raphael was painting his magnificent fresco, The School of Athens, he wanted something that could embellish the entirety of philosophy's diversity. And what do the leading lines to the center of the image lead us to? That's right, our good friends, Plato and Aristotle. Plato with his hand up towards the signature heavenly ideal, and Aristotle with his arm rooted firmly down to his practical pursuits. We can even see Diogenes here in his signature pose. But in case that wasn't obvious enough, boom. Every philosopher to the right of this line serves the practical, and everyone to the left, the ideal. This shows two very important things about philosophy. The first is that this isn't just a conflict within philosophy, it is the definitive conflict within the field. And second of all, these two sides didn't exist in a vacuum. They were constantly interacting with, criticizing, and appraising the other. This has existed for millennia, but we are the first ones to be special because we are the first ones to know why it exists. Our fallacy paradox. We know that a relentless pursuit of either side cannot work. That means we are the first people to try and institute some kind of change. The solution then is to become like Diogenes. We need to take a step back and we need to ask ourselves, have we missed the point? What are we doing here? We need to understand that dialectic has limits. Its logical systems were not meant to replace our cognition. They are meant to augment our own understanding of the world. If we treat logic as an end in and of itself, we will run into problems. And there is no greater example of that than the trolley problem. Everyone's heard of it. You can pull the lever, save 5 people, sacrificing 1, or you can do nothing and let 5 people die. Now, from a logical, utilitarian perspective, the answer is simple. Sacrifice. You save the most people. And yet, a study by the MIT shows that people who chose sacrifice were viewed as less trustworthy. They were viewed as less worthy partners. What this means is that our psychology betrays something deeper beyond philosophy and beyond logic. To that end, it's time I came clean. See, I too have committed a logical fallacy in this speech. Earlier, when I said that humans were illogical and irrational, my wording implied that logic was some kind of on-off switch, with humans being on the illogical end. As it turns out, it's more like this. We don't conform to logic or to non-logic, because in reality, all of these are manufactured concepts manufactured by us, for us. But if we try to replace our cognition and replace our thinking with logic entirely, what we risk doing is building tall, intellectual ivory towers that are increasingly inaccessible to the common man. This isn't accomplishing anything aside from creating a breeding ground for elitism and snobbery. And when the average person no longer has access to intellectualism, they start to dissent. It is absolutely no coincidence that anti-intellectualism has been growing in recent years. But first, let's take a step back. We're almost there, but we're missing a piece. Sure, our pesky owl of Minerva and our fallacy paradox are the culprits, but they had accomplices. You see, debate culture really is becoming more toxic, and we are ultimately to blame. Do you remember what I told you at the beginning of the speech about what debate was meant to do? I wouldn't blame the people in this hall for forgetting, because outside it's very clear that everyone has forgotten too. We no longer care about the truth. What we should be doing is dissociating our ego from our debates, recognizing that a debate isn't a tennis match between two personas, it's a joint pursuit at the truth. But that's so boring. Debate competitions pitch winning as a bragging right. Polarizing news channels pit vicious opponents against each other to rack up controversy and generate more views. In an environment as toxic as that, admitting you are wrong is tantamount to surrendering unconditionally in a brutal war. No one wants to do that. But the choice is still with us. It's a very simple one. Every single time we enter a debate, all we have to do is ask ourselves, am I being intellectually honest? This is just a debate. I can be right or I can be wrong. The truth is what matters. All right, now, coming back to our original question all the way at the beginning, what exactly was our professor trying to teach his poor students? I think it would be something like this. Even if all of our logical systems might be, in the strictest sense of the word, imperfect, a wrong answer is not a meaningless one. If we continue to over-rely on our systems We'll be leading ourselves around in circles. We'll always be on the cusp on, but never truly reach the point of understanding. That is when the continuum of our methodology will fail and our wills will truly be tested. That last part is probably the most important takeaway of this entire speech. No amount of intellectualization could ever replace the serene tranquility of going out, walking the dog, watering the plants, or really any of the humble activities that bring you in the audience some solace. In our attempts to categorize and compartmentalize everything we see into these neat little logical systems, we risk our own mental peace of mind. And that should never be the case. Our generation stands at an era-defining crossroads. This over-reliance on logical systems and the monsters it can create is just one among many of the myriads of issues that we have to solve. That change will not come easy. It can feel unfair, almost infuriating, but also, in a sense, empowering. It means we and we alone have the chance to be the architect of a greater, better future, a better society for all. You'll have noticed throughout the speech that I wasn't really at the top of my game. I was stumbling around, fumbling in the dark until I just happened to come across something that could help me. Our generation may end up having to go through much the same trials, but it can still happen. You'll also have noticed that my entire speech is based on questions, on inquiries. And that's really how we should approach life, not with a set state of mind, a set division, a set school of thought, just with the genuine drive to learn more and an authentic sense of curiosity. And who knows, if we can really achieve these things, then maybe, just maybe, we can turn something like this into something like this. Wouldn't that be nice? But ultimately, no matter what we do, no matter how we do it, that change starts, as it always has throughout all of history, here, from within, from our youth. Thank you very much for your time.